Hello everyone, and welcome to my talk. Now this talk is called Enhance Your Productivity with Quarkus, and obviously it's a Quarkus talk, but it's a bit different to some of the usual Quarkus talks we do, because rather than talking about how Quarkus is small and light and fast and cloud native, or showing you how you actually do things with APIs, this is more about just how Quarkus can generally enhance your productivity and some of the cool features that we have to enable that. So we have lots of new features like dev UI and dev services and continuous testing that I'm going to show off in this talk and show how they just make your life easier as a developer and make it easier for you to just get focused on writing code. Now, this is sort of a code-focused presentation because I will be in my IDE for most of the talk, but it's not really that much about the code. It's more about the experience of writing the code, if that makes sense. Now, first, a little bit about me. I'm Stuart Douglas. I'm a senior principal software engineer at Red Hat. I'm a core developer on Quarkus. I'm one of the founders of the project. I'm the founder of the Undertow project and a co-lead of the servlet specification. And I've been working on Java middleware for over a decade. Before I worked on Undertow and Quarkus, I was a developer on the Wildfly application server. Now, enough with the slides. So if we're going to get started with Quarkus, the easiest way to do it is to go to code.quarkus.io and generate an application. Now, I'm going to generate a simple application today. I'm going to have Hibernate for database access. And I'm just going to use Panache, which is an extension that Quarkus provides to make Hibernate a little bit easier. I'm going to use HTTP. So for that, I'm going to use REST Easy Reactive. And even though this isn't a reactive application, you can still use REST Easy Reactive for blocking applications as well. It works with both. You don't sort of have to pick and choose between reactive or blocking. I am going to use a PostgreSQL database. So I'll get the JDBC Postgres driver. I'm going to add security in my application as well. So I'm going to add the OpenID Connect extension. So this allows you to secure your app with Keycloak or with any other OpenID Connect provider. And finally, I'm going to add Open API because it's just generally quite useful to have. And then hit the generate button and we download the application. However, in the interest of saving time, I've actually prepared one earlier. This has those same extensions I already selected. The only change I've made since I downloaded it is I've added, I haven't added it. Well, one change I need to make is add a new extension called, well, not an extension, just a new dependency, which doesn't show up in code.quarkus.io at the moment, called Quarkus test-security, which we can use to test our application. And we should be good to go. So now let's have a look at what we've actually got in this generated application. We've got the standard Maven project with a POM. It's got some Quarkus dependencies, the ones that we've selected in the project generator. It has a simple REST endpoint that says hello, basically just a hello world endpoint. It has an empty configuration file that will pretty much remain empty. And we have some tests. Now, if we build this project, install skip tests. So when we build this project, it's going to create a Quarkus application in the target directory. And then if we run it, Quarkus-run.jar, it completely fails to boot because we haven't configured OpenID Connect. And by default, it just assumes that if you've added it and haven't configured it, that's an error and it lets you know early rather than sort of running in unsecured mode. Now, okay, let's see what happens if we try and start it in dev mode. So development mode basically lets you run Quarkus with a whole heap of development features enabled. So when you're running in production mode, it's a very lean, slimmed down application. In dev mode, it has a lot of other features. And you can see here now that it's actually starting a database and starting Keycloak. So I don't know if that went a bit too fast, so I'll run it again. But just down in the little status thing at the bottom, you'll see like two lines, one saying dev services for Postgres starting, and one Keycloak dev services starting. And so basically, because we added a PostgreSQL database, and because we added OpenID Connect, but then we didn't actually configure them, Quarkus in dev mode or test mode will just assume that, oh, you've added this, but you haven't configured it. I'll just configure this for you. So it will use test containers to start these services in the background and then automatically wire them up so they'll just work. Unfortunately, this isn't the fastest laptop in the world, and Keycloak does take a little minute to start, but Quarkus is all started now, and Keycloak's configured, and a database is configured, all without having to write a single line of config. And it's also important to note that all the code that starts up those containers and manages all that doesn't end up in the production application. It's strictly a dev mode only type thing. So now, if we go and have a look at our application, we have our hello endpoint. It just says, it's a bit small, hello REST easy reactive. And because development mode supports live reload, we can actually just change this, go back to the browser, refresh, and the changes are live pretty much immediately. And we can make any changes we want here, and they should be picked up straight away. So it's kind of like programming in a scripting language where there's no sort of compile step in the middle, because Quarkus takes care of that for you. Now, all right, we've got a basic hello world endpoint. Now let's add some security to it. So the way you do security, so we can just add a roles allowed annotation. We'll just go roles allowed admin, because we need administrative access to say hello world, of course. And now if we go back and hit refresh, we get a 401 error. That's because we're not authorized. Now, hitting this in a browser, you don't really get an informative error message, because Keycloak, this application is basically a microservice backend. So Keycloak is running in service mode. And what that means is that it will just send back a 401. It assumes that your single page application or whatever's serving the front end and sending requests using JavaScript will know how to authenticate if it gets a 401. So there's no challenge. It doesn't redirect to a login page. It just sends back that 401, and you're kind of on your own. You can actually configure it to redirect to a login page, but it's not really what you want for this type of service. So how are we going to test this as a developer? Now, if I go back to my application, you might see that down the bottom there's a line here that says press R to resume testing, O to toggle test output, or H for more options. If we press H, we can see that one of these options is D, to open the dev UI in a browser. So if I just hit D in this console, we've got the dev UI there, and that's, the zoom is a bit funny there, which is just localhost /q/dev. And basically, there's just a whole heap of additional tooling that Quarkus extensions can provide that are accessible to you in your browser. Now, once again, all this functionality is generally not something that goes into the final application. It's something that's dev mode only. And any extension can contribute to this and contribute their own tooling. Like, you could even write tooling only extensions if you really sort of had a need for it. So one of these is OpenID Connect. So if we hit this provider thing here, we can see that there's the option to log into a single page application. So if we hit this button, we're taken to the Keycloak login page. Now, Keycloak dev services provides a few different usernames and passwords out of the box, although you can configure your own if you need to. And one of the ones it provides is Alice, with username and password both Alice. So we're going to log in as Alice because she's an administrator. So apparently Alice is not a very secure password according to Chrome, but we'll ignore that. Now, now that we're logged in, you can actually see the token that Keycloak has provided you. You can see both the raw form and more handily, you can see what it looks like when it's actually decoded. So if you're trying to debug any OpenID Connect issues and just sort of see what the server is sending back and figuring out why something won't work, this just makes it easier to have a look at what's actually in the token that's been returned. Now, we can then go here and type hello and test this with the access token. And we can see that when we sent that back, we got a 200 response, so it's no longer a 401, but it doesn't really give us any more details, and this isn't super helpful. It's just like a quick way of checking that a path is accessible or not. Fortunately, though, we do have a better way of testing these endpoints, and that because I added Open API, we actually get Swagger UI embedded in the Dev UI as well. So now if I open up Swagger UI, I can see that it's automatically picked up that I have this endpoint. And if I go try it out and hit execute, because I had already logged in, it's actually sent the Keycloak part of the Dev UI has propagated my token to here, and I'm now authenticated as Alice when I make these requests. So you can see that when it's sending this request, it's sending my token, and it's responding as normal. Now, this also, Swagger UI also lets you test posts, and actually makes it very easy because you can. So if we make another one that's just a different hello world where we actually provide a name. Now, if we refresh, we can see that our post endpoint has appeared, and we can just try it out and say hello to Bob and execute, and we've got the response we want. And if you're using just an object, this will actually make it, Swagger UI will make it easy to just fill in the fields, and just generally makes it really easy to see exactly what APIs are in your application and easy to test them out even when they're secured by OpenID Connect or just on web tokens or, yeah. So it just generally makes the developer's life easier. Now, this is all well and good, but really we shouldn't be testing out our applications by manually hitting things in the browser. And really we should be writing tests. So one of the really cool new features that Quarkus has is something called continuous testing. Now, if we go back to our application, and we'll see down the bottom here that in this little bit of text, there's press R to resume testing, or O to toggle test output. We're going to press O first so we can. We're going to press O first so we can actually see the test output, because by default we don't put the test out into the console just to sort of keep the noise to a minimum. And then we're just going to press R. And now we get this little status line down the bottom. So starting the tests. And you can see that it's actually starting some more dev services containers. So this is so that the tests and the and dev mode don't share the same Docker containers, so that tests can't interfere with data in your dev mode database and vice versa. So if you've added a whole heap of stuff into your dev mode database while you're playing around, it won't interfere with the tests, so your tests won't accidentally delete your dev mode data. It's just kept completely isolated. Now, you can see here that our test is run. It took a little while to run that first time because it was starting the dev services, but once they've been started, they stay started. So if we press R to rerun it now, you can see that it runs much faster, like almost instantly. Now, unfortunately, our test is failing because we're getting a 401, because by default security is still enabled, and we can easily get around that just by using our test security. I haven't refreshed my IDE since I added it. Let me just reload the project. Our test security annotation, and here we can say, like this takes a few different options. You can just turn off authorization entirely, but we'll just say user equals Alice, roles equals admin, and press R to read the test. Because that's been saved, the test is run automatically, and now it's failing because the text is different. So now if I update my test to get the most up-to-date, to be correct, now the test is passing. Now I can also go and make changes to my resource itself. Like, so say I want to make it say hello to the currently logged in user. I can inject the security identity, and instead of saying hello Stu, I'll say hello identity dot get principal dot get name. Save that, and the tests immediately run and fail. And now I need to update this to be say hello to Alice. Save it again, and it's complete. Now, these tests, at the moment, I've only got one resource and one test class, so you change anything and the tests almost run. But the way this works is that it's very fine-grained. So when it actually runs the test the first time, it instruments the Java code and tracks which tests are affected by which classes. And so that when you modify something, it will only run the subset of tests that actually test that code. Like, in a way, it's a similar concept to code coverage, where J4K or your code coverage tool sort of figures out which code is covered by tests. This does it in a similar manner, but uses that information to know which tests need to be rerun on change. So I'm going to demonstrate that a bit now by actually making use of that database that we first added back at the start. So I might add a bit of a to-do application and then write some tests for it. Just going to do the back end, obviously, because I'm not a front-end programmer. So I'll add a to-do entity. I'll say it extends Panache entity. Now, I don't want to talk too much about Panache, but basically it is basically an extra framework that we've added into Quarkus to make it easier to write code that uses Hibernate. So Panache, we don't have to worry about IDs because Panache entity automatically provides an ID for us. And we also don't need to worry about getters and setters. So we can just say public string item, and that's all we need. We'll make it not nullable because we need to have that. We'll then have public boolean completed. And yeah, we'll just keep it simple. Okay, so now I've got my entity. Let's create a REST endpoint that can use it. So I'm just going to create a to-do resource. Now it's a JAX-RS endpoint, so we add a /path at path /to-do. We want to make it authenticated, so roles allowed admin. Now we'll just add a endpoint that lists all the to-dos. So we just return to-do dot find all. Dot list. And that's pretty much all we need to list all our to-dos. And now we need to write a test for it. So we'll add a new to-do test. Now we'll make this a Clarkus test, and we'll also use an annotation called test HTTP endpoint. And what this does is that if we tell it that we're testing to-do resource, then we can basically omit the /to-do at the start of our URLs. It just basically automatically wires that up for us. So now if I do test public void test list all, I'm going to use something called rest assured. So which is basically the testing framework that we tend to use in Quarkus. You don't have to use it, but we do just provide, like, automatically wire it up for you so that it just makes using it a bit easier. And it's quite an intuitive API for the most part. So we'll say if we just get, and because we've given this test HTTP resource, we don't need to provide a path because it already knows the base path. Then status code will be 200, and then we'll extract the body. Extract as to do class. So now we're testing our list endpoint, and this should be empty. So we'll go assert dot assert should be assertions. Sorry. Dot assert equals 0 list dot length. Now if we save that, the test is run and it is failing. We're getting a 401 because we need our test security annotation because we've got a secured endpoint. And yeah, now it's passing. But an empty list doesn't really prove much, so let's just add a user to the database. Add a to-do item to the database. Void add to-do. We'll make this transactional so that it gets committed to the database. To-do equals new to-do dot item equals do J4K talk to-do dot persist and flush. So now if I call add to-do, then I should be able to test that this item is in the database. Now, in this first test, I actually extracted the list of to-dos and tested them manually, but you can actually test, Rest Assured provides a way of testing JSON that is a bit simpler. So rather than using .extract, you use .body, and then we give a path. So in this case, because it's returning an array, we'll verify what the 0th element is and what its item field is, and it's matches dot is do J4. Yeah. So now that should test that there's one item in the database and that it's this do J4K talk. Now, one problem we've got is that this test is just leaving this item in the database. So let's just add some code to actually clean up after ourselves. So we'll go before all public void clean to do dot delete all. So that makes sure that once we start adding other tests, that they will, oh, no, it won't. Oh, I need to add a transactional because that code is wrong. And now, oh, it must be static. Oh, we want before each, not before all. There we go. So now, before every test, we'll clean out the database, and we can see that now my test is working so that we know that that list endpoint is good to go. So let's add some more endpoints. We'll add a post to just create a new to-do. To-do dot persist and flush. Need to make it transactional. Now let's write the test for it. So you may have noticed that we now have 2 tests in the project, but while I was modifying that other code, it was only running that one because Quarkus knows that this code that I'm modifying has nothing to do with our reactive greeting resource or reactive greeting resource test. So it's only testing the to-do code. It's not running the test for the other code in the project. So now I have this resource. I will add a new test for it. And I'll just copy and paste this test. Test add item. So what I will do is I will create a new to-do object, write tests, rest assured, and then I'll post it. But to do a post, I go rest assured dot given dot body to do dot content type JSON dot post dot then status code is will be a 204, no content, and that's all we can. That should create the item in the database. And now that we have it, we can use our list endpoint. We could use our list endpoint to verify it, and because that code's already written, that's exactly what we'll do. We'll verify that the code is write tests. And now, if we save that, the test is passing. First go even. Well, should have had and we can see that if I make a deliberate error, it does fail. So it's just very unusual to get it to go right first go. So I think we're nearly out of time, but I hope that this has shown you just how easy it is to just get started with Quarkus and be productive straight away, and just how quickly you can get feedback in terms of getting test results and basically getting instant feedback. As soon as you save your code, you know if your test has passed or failed or not, and just how targeted those test results are in terms of only testing the things that have been changed. Now, just before I go, I'm just going to show one other cool feature of the Dev UI. And if we go back into the main Dev UI, we've got here this option for the config editor. Now, this lists every config property in Quarkus, and there is a lot of them because there's quite a few extensions. So you can use it to sort of see what config properties are available. But what I'm going to show you here is this little Dev Services tab up the top. And one of the options here is copy to prod profile. So if I hit that and then have a look at my application.properties, I can see that all those values that were automatically set have now been copied into application.properties, and they've been copied into the prod profile. So test and development mode will still use dev services. But this just makes it easy for me to see exactly what I need to actually set to run Quarkus in production. Because it's one thing to have Quarkus automatically wire everything up for you, but then you'd still need to go and figure out what all those properties are that you need to set manually when you actually want to put it into production. But this feature just makes it easy to see exactly which ones were automatically set, and it should be relatively straightforward to go through and update these for your environment to point to the correct services. Of course, in a lot of cases, you'll be providing these as environment variables into your pods, so you won't even really need them in application.properties, but it's still just easy to see. It's still just nice to be able to see exactly what properties it is that you need to set. And yeah, I think that's pretty much it for time. So I hope you've enjoyed the talk, and I hope it's just sort of given you an idea about the things that Quarkus does to try and make your life as a developer easier, so you can just focus on writing code without the framework or configuration getting in your way. So if you want to learn more, just go to quarkus.io. There's heaps of content there and heaps of documentation. Thanks a lot for your time, everyone. I hope you've enjoyed the talk. And that's pretty much it from me.